At my nephew's graduation dinner, my brother stood up with his wine glass and told the whole table I'd never amounted to anything without him carrying me. I set my fork down, smiled, and said nothing. What none of them knew was that the accountant sitting 2 seats away had spent the last 6 months trying to figure out where $40,000 of our late father's trust had actually gone. My name is Caroline Voss. I'm 51, and for 3 years I managed our father's estate quietly, without asking anyone for credit, while my brother Peter told anyone who'd listen that he was the one holding the family together. I let him have that story, because I'd learned that being underestimated buys you room nobody watches too closely. Why did the estate's court-appointed accountant, a careful man named Felix Rohn, keep glancing at his phone all through dinner instead of eating? That question sat with me the entire meal, and I already had a guess. Our father died 4 years ago and left the family hardware distribution business jointly to Peter and me, with a clause that whoever managed daily operations would draw a modest management salary, reviewed annually by an independent accountant. Peter took the title, I took the actual work, because Peter had never once balanced a ledger in his life, and everyone in the family knew it, including him. He liked being called president. I liked knowing where every dollar went. For 3 years that arrangement worked, or at least I believed it did, right up until Felix called me on a Thursday and asked, carefully, whether I'd approved a series of consulting payments to a company called Bridgepoint Advisory. I hadn't. I'd never heard of Bridgepoint Advisory in my life. I didn't call Peter that night. I didn't send an angry text. I did what I'd done my whole career before I stepped back to run the family business. I pulled the paper trail quietly and let it tell me the truth before I said a single word to the one person it pointed at. Felix sent me 3 years of disbursement records. Buried among vendor payments and payroll, $41,000 had gone out in 12 payments to Bridgepoint Advisory, each one signed off under my digital approval code, a code I had never once shared with my brother, or so I'd believed until Felix mentioned, almost offhand, that the code had been reset 18 months earlier by IT at Peter's request, for a laptop upgrade he said I'd asked for. I never asked for that laptop upgrade. I sat with that fact for 2 days before doing anything. I pulled our father's original trust documents and found the annual review clause I remembered, and a second clause I'd forgotten, requiring unanimous sign-off from both siblings for any outside consulting engagement over $5,000. There was no such sign-off on file, just my code, used without me, 12 times. I called Felix back and asked him one question. Where does Bridgepoint's money go after we pay it? He said he'd need a week to trace it properly through a forensic review, since Bridgepoint's registered address turned out to be a mailbox rental store 2 towns over. I told him to take the week. I didn't warn Peter. I kept showing up to family dinners, kept listening to him talk about how he'd saved the business after Dad died, kept letting him believe I was still the quiet, grateful sister who'd let him wear the title. Felix called on the 6th day. Bridgepoint Advisory was registered to Peter's wife's maiden name, filed the same month the digital code was reset. Every consulting payment had moved, within days, into a personal account Peter used for his boat slip fees and a membership at a golf club I didn't know he'd joined. There was no consulting work. There were no reports, no invoices beyond a single template reused 12 times with the date changed. My brother had built a small fake vendor to bill our father's estate for money that funded his own lifestyle, using my name to authorize it. I let 1 more week pass before I did anything, because Felix wanted to finish a full audit rather than hand me half a case, and because I wanted to see if Peter would say anything unprompted. He didn't. If anything, he got louder about his own importance to the family, which is often what happens right before someone gets caught. The story gets more elaborate the closer the truth gets. The graduation dinner wasn't something I planned as a stage. It was simply the next family gathering on the calendar, held at Peter's house, with our mother and my nephew's in-laws, and, because Peter had insisted on inviting the estate's professionals to celebrate everyone who kept Dad's legacy alive, Felix Rohn sitting quietly near the end of the table, with a folder he'd asked to bring along, at my request, in case I needed it. Peter stood with his wine glass halfway through dessert and made his toast about carrying the family, about how some people build and some people just show up. He looked at me when he said the second part. I laughed, because I'd practiced that laugh for 2 weeks, and I let him sit back down satisfied. Then I asked Felix, gently, if he wouldn't mind sharing the annual estate review with the table, since everyone present had a stake in Dad's legacy and deserved to know it was healthy. Peter's smile didn't move yet. Felix opened his folder and, in the same even voice he used for every review, mentioned that this year's audit had identified an unusual vendor relationship requiring disclosure to all beneficiaries under the trust's terms. I watched my brother's hand tighten around his glass. Felix didn't accuse anyone. He simply read the facts. 12 payments to Bridgepoint Advisory totaling $41,000. Authorized under a code reset without the co-trustee's knowledge. Funds traced to a personal account linked to boat and club memberships. No verifiable consulting work delivered. He set a single page on the table, the Bridgepoint registration, showing the maiden name everyone at that table recognized immediately. Peter tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding, that Bridgepoint had done real strategic work he could document, that this was clearly some kind of accounting error. Felix said, calmly, that he'd welcome any invoices or work product Peter could provide within 5 business days, since none currently existed in the estate's files. Our mother's face had gone very still. My nephew looked between his father and the folder like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want the answer to. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call him a thief in front of his son on his son's own graduation night. I said only that I'd asked Felix to bring the review because I believed the family deserved to know the truth about Dad's estate before anyone made another toast about who'd carried it. Then I asked Peter to step outside with me for a moment, and he came, because refusing in front of everyone would have said more than following me out. On the porch, he dropped the performance fast. He said he'd needed the money after his own consulting business failed 2 years back, that he'd meant to pay it back before anyone noticed, that he never thought I'd actually look. I told him I hadn't been looking for trouble. Felix had found an irregularity doing his job, and I'd simply let the truth finish what he started. Peter asked what happens now. I told him the estate's attorney would be filing a report with the court overseeing the trust, that restitution would be expected, and that his continued role as managing trustee was something the family, and likely the court, would need to reconsider. He asked if I was doing this to humiliate him. I said no. I was doing it because he'd spent 3 years telling everyone he carried this family, while quietly draining what our father left behind, and I wasn't willing to keep managing his lie the way I'd managed the business. The trust's attorney filed the disclosure with the probate court the following week. Peter was removed as co-trustee by court order 2 months later, required to repay the $41,000 in structured installments, and barred from any future fiduciary role connected to the estate. He never faced criminal charges, since the family agreed, at our mother's request, to resolve it civilly rather than drag Dad's name through a courtroom beyond what the probate filing already required. It cost him more than money. It cost him the title he'd built his whole identity around. I didn't feel triumphant watching it unfold. I felt something quieter, closer to relief, the kind that comes from finally not having to hold 2 truths at once. I took over as sole managing trustee, the role I'd effectively been doing anyway, except now with my name attached to it honestly, instead of hidden behind his. We're civil at family gatherings now, my brother and I. The way people are civil when too much has been said to pretend otherwise, but too much history remains to walk away entirely. My mother and I are closer than we've been in years. My nephew still calls me for advice, which tells me he understood more of that night than any of us wanted him to. What I learned is that being the quiet one doesn't mean being the forgotten one. Evidence doesn't need volume, it just needs time, and the patience to let someone's own paperwork tell on them. If you found out someone in your own family had been quietly building their reputation on money that wasn't theirs, would you have confronted them the moment you suspected it? Or would you have waited, the way I did, until the proof left them nothing left to explain away?